I think we can get started. Let me show my screen. I'm not going to ask you to I'm now going to ask you please to mute your microphones. I can do it myself for everyone, but I think we're all adults here and it's better if you guys are doing it on yourself. Thank you for joining this great webinar. Well, I hope so. Lots of questions, lots of hot topics. The presentation is probably going to last about an hour. I will stop at 45 minutes.
I'm doing something for about an hour.
And lots of questions probably at the end. Some questions have already been received by me. We'll address those at the end, if not answered during the presentation. So I will just ask you to stick with me because there's a lot to cover. And as I said, hot topics, everyone wants to know about it. So I'll try to be as clear as possible. Once again, please put your microphone down or microphone off so we can all enjoy the presentation. All right. First of all, just wanted to introduce myself, as you can see in the picture. So CPA, professional accountant in France and in the US. Done a lot of things in my life, including working for big firms and graduated in the US and in France, as well as many years of experience. And just for the fun of it, happens to be a certified sworn-in translator, US Notary Public, and an official elected person in France. The menu of the day will be following the 7 parts here. We'll go over first of the basics of individual French tax requirements, French fiscal system. A lot of people know about it, but I think it's good to remind everyone the basics. Then we'll go about immigration status. Even though I'm not a lawyer, I just wanted to share with you a slide on this topic. And then we'll go into the main questions here will be the option for working remotely in France, the other options we have also in France, and the rest are useful links about Monzo indeed. As I said, if you can all put your microphone off, that would be great so everyone can enjoy the presentation. All right, so here we'll talk about the individual French tax requirements, the ABC of the French tax system, the PASS, which everyone knows through the withholding system or the pay in the UK, the tax residency that everybody seems to understand, but it's not very well understood, and general tax rules. All right, so in France, the tax system is progressive. Every year it is dictated by the finance law. You have five tax brackets for 2020. I know we are in 2021, but everybody knows that in France, calendar year starts in January and finishes in December 31st, not like in the UK, for example, in Australia, where it goes from April to April. You can see here the tax bracket on the right. So basically, if your reported income falls into one of those brackets, this is the amount of taxation you will have to pay. The declaration is done in May of each year, depending on which department you live in. So the deadlines usually follow 3 different dates, and I'll show you that later, but it's usually late May. Last year we had an extension, but this year we don't know due to COVID if we'll have the same extension. It's based on actual earnings with some type of tax deductions. It's inclusive of all your French income, as you can see here, and very important, your worldwide income. So even if you're a retired person living in France and having US or UK or Australia or Canadian income or pension needs to be reported. I didn't say taxed, I said reported, and we'll talk about the taxation later. And the non-French bank account, very critical. The tax authorities in France, which is called DGFIP, the equivalent of the IRS, HMRC, or CRA, are very aggressive on this. So lots of questions, a lot of audits around non-French bank accounts. So please make sure to report those. And again, I'm here to answer all of your questions. I'm not reading all of the slides because I'm sure you can read as well as I'm speaking about it. The following point is PASS, prélèvement à la source. So for those are coming from the US or for the UK, nothing is new because basically France has started this in 2019. You earn money, whether through wages or through your rental income, and you pay every month a little bit of it through your withholdings, directly taken out from your salary or directly taken out from your bank account by the authorities based on prior year numbers. The pass rate is usually shown onto your impo.gov website access, which everybody should have access to, and that you can modulate, you can change your pass rate if you believe it's incorrect, or if you have something new in your life, such as a birth, marriage, divorce, or whatever you have in your life, you can modify your pass rate depending on your situation. And again, the principle is the same that anywhere else. You pay as you go, and at the end of the year, we'll look at how much you have paid. I apologize if I ask you guys to put on mute your microphone. Please don't let me do it. If you can do it yourself, that'll be great. Looks like I have to do it myself. Okay. Anyhow, back to the presentation. So the pass rate goes simply as you pay every month, and at the end of the year, we'll look at how much theoretically you should have paid versus how much you paid, and you either underpaid or overpaid. Regarding tax residency rules, a lot of people are not understanding the Article 4B-1 of the tax code, which clearly explains that it's not a black or white situation. They give three main principles, which I try here to extend so people understand. Nobody in the text, in the tax laws, talks about the 183 days rule. It is understood from it in most of cases. But you have to understand, if somebody were to basically travel around the world, obviously not on a COVID year, and spend most of his time or her time in France, even though he's beyond or below the 183 days cap, he will be considered a French tax resident. If you have kids in France and they are in school, then de facto, automatically you are a French tax resident. If you and your wife or your spouse have decided that's it, I love France, as soon as you set off your first foot on ground on French soil after landing at Charles de Gaulle or Nice airport, you are officially a French tax resident. There are rules on how to, the first year, pro rata basis, only declare what you earn since you made French tax resident. But again, if you work from France, especially in your case, meaning I sit in France physically working for a company based in Australia, in UK, or in New York, then you are a French fiscal resident because your money is captured and generated from French soil. This is very important to keep in mind because lots of people tell me, I'm a freelancer, my company in the US, I get paid in the US, no problem. No, you are a French tax resident. So keep that in mind for later. The next slide is a transition to exactly what we're looking at, is the notion of territoriality. French tax rules follow territoriality. What means? That means that if you work from France, despite wherever your company is based, you are subject to French taxation. And if you are subject to French taxation, you need to register yourself. Obviously, this webinar will give you all the insight on what to do and how to do it, but you need to understand that concept. Now, a lot of people tell me, Well, what happened for me if I got stuck due to COVID, I couldn't travel? Obviously, we're not talking about here exemption for people that happen to be in France for a few weeks or few months for reasons that were beyond their control. We're talking about people that may have started as being here for reasons that were beyond of their control, or to just join a spouse, a friend, a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, and ended up staying longer. So those people are important to understand that you are French tax resident. We talked about it. Your income, even though it's subject to US or UK tax, is supposed to be by default subject to French taxation. And you must register. You and your employer are at risks if you're not doing so. And one of the risks, as you can see here, is you can end up being taxed double, meaning you're paying tax in the UK and the US because you believe you're under the pay system, and then you may end up having to pay here not only the withholding tax you should have paid in France, but also all the social contributions and everything else. And on top of that, unfortunately, you can be fined for evading French taxation. If you are among those here, or you can see or relate your case here, then you are in the right webinar. Now, filing deadlines and tax forms, just to remind what I already said, a few things about the different deadlines and so on. You should file your French tax return even, and that's very important. We don't have that in the US, for example, or in the UK, where you have zero income, and you have to file French tax return. You must file a French tax return. If you're non-resident, that's something else. You only file on the money earned in France. How to file? Then you have three ways. Paper filing, which like everywhere else tend to be disappearing because we want to be paperless and not killing the trees anymore. File online, you can have access to your impo.gov website, as I said, and you can file through that option or through EDI, which is electronic filing, usually offered by two professionals like us. Why is it the best solution? Because not only we usually compute it right, but also we get a confirmation that it's been accepted by the tax authorities. The deadlines, we talked about it earlier. You can see here the official deadlines as it stands today. As you can see, you have three types of departments, and everybody knows where they live. The departments are usually the two first digits of the postal code. And you can see here that wherever you are, if you're filing through an accountant, through an EDI, you get until June 8th. That's the fun part. Regarding now, here, the main forms, I just felt it was nice to share that with you. As you know, I'm very into social network and sharing lots of knowledge to the international community. And I prepare that for you guys so that you know which are the forms that are usually pertaining to you. Don't worry, I won't test you on this at the end of my presentation, but just it was for you to be aware that a 1040 in the US is the equivalent of a 2042 in France. And all the schedules that we have in the US, for example, A, B, C's, and Schedule E and D and so on, are here located at 2042C, 2240C Pro. Two things I want to make sure, whether you work with us or not, that you need to make sure that you have the 2047 done, which is the declaration for foreign income. And as I said, it's any income you're making in the outside of France. And the 3916, which is the declaration of all your non-French bank accounts. Just make sure you understand that all of the non-French bank accounts, whether there's a penny there or 1 million, whether they have been opened recently or 40 years ago, whether they have been closed during 2020, they all have to be reported. It's not like the FBAR in the US, where we're going to be asking you the average amount there or how much there you have. In France, we will not ask you how much you have there. But trust me, if you don't report, you will get a letter, because now the French tax authorities are now in touch with all the main tax authorities worldwide to know about your French tax. And usually that's the point of entry for a tax audit. And nobody wants to have a tax inspection, especially with the French tax authorities. Immigration status, I just felt that it would be interesting to remind you the main visas. As I said, I'm not a lawyer, so I will not comment too much on it. But just remember that all of you should have theoretically a visa, and you should know if your visa allows you to work in France. Because the first question you ask yourself before we get into fiscal consequences, you should ask yourself the question, am I legally, and I didn't say fiscally, am I legally allowed to work? Now, everybody knows that in the US, for example, Al Capone was not caught by killing people for murders and everything else, but he was caught for fiscal evasion, right? So although you can be fine with immigration or not, just keep in mind that tax authorities will always expect you to file a tax return should you be allowed. So in a nutshell, what I mean is you want to make sure that you're allowed to work in France, because down the road, it will damage the potential path to carte de séjour or French citizenship. But at the same time, one is not connected to the other. So I've had clients that were illegally allowed to work in France, and yet they worked. They must report their French tax return, even though they weren't allowed to work in France. As I said, Al Capone was caught on that. So let's be sure that you don't end up like Al Capone. Now we're getting to the perfect slide, and we're getting into what everybody has been expecting to get answers from us here. So you must understand that there are options to operate in France. However, there are pluses and minuses. There are advantages and disadvantages, drawbacks like everywhere, and you must weigh in all of your options. So in this slide, I'm going to show you the different options you have. The first one is you want to keep your status of being an employee of your foreign company, what we call detached. You want to make sure that your company in the US, whether you are a single member LLC or a UK limited company, you want to keep that entity there, but you want to open a branch or a sub, and we'll talk about the differences of both. Then you have the option of what we call the CNFE, and then everybody's going to ask me what the hell means CNFE. We'll talk about it. It means Center of National for Foreign Entity. And then the classic one, everybody has heard about it, is the corporate structure should you decide to incorporate yourself under what we call an SIS, an SIRL, or URL, or ME, okay? So those are the main options. Now let's go into all of it, each of them. I apologize, I don't know who's calling me at this time. All right, so the first one, lots of information. Bear with me, stick with me, because it's going to be tough. So the first option is you want to keep your employment contract. So let's take an example of somebody who's from the UK, has been under the UK tax system, under what we call the pay. So contributing to Social Security, taxes, and so on. But your employer or yourself decides to just go to France for theoretically a certain amount of month, not very long, but certain amount of month. Usually these type of options are available for a period that are less than 12 months. So you can register, or your employer can register you for the work you're going to be doing in France. Let's put an example, you're doing a consulting job, or you're doing a building job, right? And you need to be on French soil for 6 months. Then you employer in the UK will follow all the steps here that I've listed here to register you in France, so that you can be legal in France during the time of your mission. What's going to happen during that time is all of your social withholdings will continue to be withheld from the UK. And for that, we all know there are totalization agreements, which we call social security agreements, between the US and France, between the UK and France, between Canada and France, and so on, allowing you to continue to contribute to those social system welfare while you are physically in France. And at the same time, in France, we will pay, your employer will declare and pay for you the tax amount of money that you should have paid for the taxes only. So at the same time, you're legal in France, you don't have to follow basically a new contract in France. And in that case, you can just carry on. And again, I'll let you read because everything is stated there in my slide. It's very important to keep in mind that usually the detached mode is available for a short period of time. The second one, setting up a branch or a subsidiary. So basically, what is the difference between a branch and a sub? A branch is not a separate legal entity of the parent corporation. And as you can see, you have the obligation to register and everything while you are in France, where a sub is a standalone entity, and can operate independently. Okay, so branch, again, you have to depend heavily on what's being done from the mother company, the headquarters, whereas the sub, you can basically do whatever you want while you are in France. The good news is the sub or the branch can be directly owned and connected to the entity that belongs in the US and the UK or abroad. And that's very important because the majority of the cases, you guys are all either freelancers or employee of a company. If you are an employee of a company, you have option 1 to be a detached. Option 2 is to invite your employer to register as a branch or subsidiary. And this can be done also for the freelancers. But they are not yet the best options. Okay, so this is option 2. Option 3, very, very less known by either professionals or by people in general. So what does the Centre National des Affaires Étrangères means? Basically, I have a US company that is located in California, and I don't want to close and terminate my LLC company that I have in California. But I want to move to France because my spouse, my family, or I love French baguette. I just want to be in France. Okay. My business and my clients are all based in the US, or I don't want to just terminate the LLC company. So what's going to happen is, okay, but at the same time, I live in France, right? So I need to basically capture the income I'm taking through a legal system in France. So you're going to tell me, okay, if I'm taking dividends, then that's fine because the dividends are usually paid either during the year, but taxed at year end. Okay, you can still do that. But the question, reality is, where is the work on the day-to-day operated and done? If it's done in France, then whether you're paying yourself for dividends or not, that that money that you generated and created needs to be exposed and paid to France. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, if you have a CNFE, which is easy to register, you can then virtually register your US California LLC company in France for the sole purpose of having a French pay stub. Okay, so what have I gained doing this? Well, first of all, you have now a status. You have what we call a fiche de paie, which is a pay slip or pay stub. Okay, which is, as everybody knows in France, a golden document. Because if you want to have an apartment or buy a house or anything, everybody knows in France, everybody's asking about fiche de paie, fiche de paie, fiche de paie. Well, you'll have one. And after 3 to 6 months of history, you can start asking already a loan. That's one. Second, you are contributing to the French social system and paying taxes in France. So you're not illegal anymore. And what I mean illegal is tax-wise, because you have a status. Okay, all right, great. Third, you're not contributing to the social system in France, so you have access to healthcare, which is a great thing in France. You can even have access to mutuelle. We'll talk about mutuelle and prévoyance, which is complementary healthcare and life policy or life term policy. Okay, okay, but the problem is, am I going to be heavily taxed? Yes, French social system, especially if you are paying yourself through French pay stub, is something that will cost you a lot. What does that mean, cost me a lot? As an employer, you must understand that the cost to salary someone in France is around 40% taxation. What I mean taxation is tax plus social charges. Okay, so what do I do? Well, you can pay yourself the minimum wage, which is called in France the SMIC, S-M-I-C. Then you only pay the minimal charges, social charges and taxes. And then the rest of it can be paid through dividends from my US company. You tell me, what have I gained like that? Well, not only you gain that you're paying as minimal as possible as social charges. For give you an example, the SMIC today net in your pocket is 1,250 euros, approximately. The cost of employing someone under SMIC is 1,700. So you see the gap is not too much. If you're paying yourself 3,000 euros net in your pocket, it probably costs the employer 4,500, okay, or 4,200. So the more you pay yourself, the more the gap is going to be there. And at the same time, you've protected yourself. Why? Because the work, and this is key to this presentation, the work you're indeed doing while sitting in France is captured by the French tax system. And the work you are not doing while sitting in France, meaning when I travel back to the UK or the US, or by just passive income from capital, which is from your capital you put into your company, you pay yourself through dividends from your foreign company. And you know that there's a double tax treaty, and most of the time, dividends are little or not taxed in France if they're already subject to taxation in your foreign country. So CNFE, according to me, and not applicable to everyone, is one of the greatest scenario for people that are working remotely, belonging to themselves, their own company, or an employer. And it's not complicated to set up. And besides, as you can see here on point 2, there are, besides the social obligation, which is creating fiche de paye every month and paying the social charges, there are no freaking tax or accounting obligations at all. The UK or US company remain here in charge of your payroll while you are in France. And the charges to basically pay the accountant or pay all of the social charges in France, even though following French tax rules, will be considered as a valid business expense into your US or UK company. Moving on to the next possibilities. Then we talked about corporate structure. So there are multiple corporate structure. I'm not going to go into many details here because you can see online, there is so much information, sometimes wrong information, but overall good information regarding those corporate structure. One of the most flexible one is basically the SIS or SASU. SIS means 2 people, SASU means all alone. It's the same thing we have in the US, single member LLC or a simple LLC. It's very easy to set up, very easy to handle, and you can have either corporate tax, IS, or pass-through entity, such as IR. And again, something in the US, whereas you have an LLC tax, such as a partnership, which will be passed through, or such as a company corporation tax as a corporate tax rate. Okay. The next one will be the SARL or EURL. A lot of information online on this. Difference is simple. SARL is a minimum.
Okay, honey, I love you.
Yes, we love you too. SARL will be minimum 2 people. EURL will be just one person. It's also one of the most advantageous system of corporate form, because it gives you access directly to your healthcare. You're going to tell me, how does it differentiate from the SIS? Well, the SIS, the only way to be part of the healthcare system, which we call the social security system, is for you to take a fiche de paye, which is a pay stub. And again, remember what we said, paying someone with a pay stub is usually around minimum 40% of taxation. Whereas in SIRL, you don't have to take a fiche de paye, you can take drawings whenever you want. You're going to tell me, how do I pay social charges and taxes at the same time? Well, I pay as you take money out. So if during 2020, I've taken 50,000 euros as drawings, the following year, then the SSI, which is a social security for independent, because you are considered an independent under that corporate structure, will basically bill me every month or quarterly based on prior year drawings. That amount of money will basically cover for my social security system. The difference between SIRL and SIS becomes very obvious if you pay yourself more than 70 to 80,000 euros. If you pay less than 70 or 80,000 euros, or you don't need to have access to social security system in France, the SIS is way more advantageous. Another trick that people are not fully aware of, if you take an SIS and only pay yourself through dividends, you can maintain your unemployment. So very useful if you have an employment for 2 years. It doesn't conflict one to the other because you pay yourself through dividends. And then another element here, a trick, if you're married or have a spouse that is a French or has access to French social security, you can leverage and optimize your income by an SIS and basically cover yourself, because you don't need the social security through your company. Ask to be sponsored by your spouse. If you're sponsored by your spouse, you're getting health coverage through that spouse. And then in your company, you don't need any more health coverage. So you basically optimizing through the SIS, and you get a higher amount of money if you take it through dividends as opposed to getting through pay stub. But again, I don't want to go through too much about it because I want to go more. I know I see the time running here. So moving on to the next one, micro enterprise, formerly known as auto-entrepreneur. Everybody thinks it's a great status. Yes, it is a great status. It's certainly the easiest status because you can register yourself on the same day, on the spot, so long as you have a French valid social security, and so long as you're on your immigration status allowed to, okay? However, the EMI system is very simplified. You pay a rate usually around 20-22% that is applicable straight to your turnover, your chiffre d'affaires, your revenues. You cannot offset any of your valid business expense. So it's a great thing for people that are doing consulting, that don't necessarily have a lot of expenses. Unfortunately, we cannot go to restaurants. There's not much to travel. So for consulting, an ME will be a great way to start, especially if you don't know where you're heading, right, with your business. Remember, and I have a whole presentation that I did a month and a half ago on this, you have thresholds on the ME. If you go over 70K for prestation de service, for service provider, then you will not be eligible for the ME anymore. Remember, if you bill more than 34,000 euros on a yearly basis, you will be subject to VAT. Anything below, you're not subject to VAT. So you really have to weigh in all of your options before you jump into choosing one of those corporate structure between SIS, SIRL, or ME. I have here listed basically all of the definitions and features of each solution. What I really want you to understand at this point is if you're working in France for a company based outside of France, we talked about the different options. Either you are being a detached, which is a short-term period of situation. Either you open a branch or a sub of your company. And again, it could be your employer or your own company, right? What do I mean that? Your company in the US, for example, can be carrying on its activities, billing to clients and so on, while you are working for it physically being in France, but you need to have also the equivalent of your US company or your UK company in France, so that that company can bill your UK or US company for the work you're doing indeed in France. Okay, very important to make sure that you are capturing, that's the key thing to understand here, is you're capturing the work you are indeed doing physically in France through one of those structures. That's critical. If you don't do that, you are in trouble. Again, if you do it for a few weeks, I don't think you'll get caught. People call me after 10 years and they've been operating like outlaws and telling me, hey, I never got caught. Well, good for you, but you might get caught one day. And look, had you been doing the right thing, everybody knows that there is what we call the Fonds de Solidarité, which is a solidarity fund that the company has been paying for all companies or all structures, such as the ME in France, a minimum of 1,500 euros a month. So had you done the right thing, you could have gotten, without doing nothing, this special help from the government. So the lesson learned from here is you're better off, even though you were doing the wrong thing in the past, even though Facebook and all the bullshitters online are telling you different stories, you're better off doing the right thing moving forward. With the last few minutes we have, I just wanted to share you a couple of the things, again, general information about, consideration working in France. We talked about employment. There are 3 types of employment in France: CDD, which is temporary fixed term contract, permanent contract, and officer, which is mandataire social. So you'll tell me in which case I will fall into one of those. Well, if you open your own company and decide to be the officer of your company, then you have the status of mandataire social. If you open your company in France and decide to be an employee, you could be either CDD or, I made a mistake here, permanent contract is CDI. Okay, I'll correct that immediately so we don't get confused. Stands for contrat à durée indéterminée, undetermined contract time. And basically, you tell me if you are a CNFE, which is based from a foreign company structure, then you can be a CDD or CDI. Usually you cannot be mandataire social. And my slide was saying earlier that you should have a relationship where you're not the officer of the company in the US working for yourself in France. In other words, if you are a single member LLC in the US wanting to be a CNFE, you have to find somebody else who can be also an officer in the US of your company at no cost or no tax, usually a sibling, a family member, or anything like that. So there could be a relationship between France and the US. The risk, and again, we can talk about hours about it, is for the French tax authority to reclassify your work or your company as what we call permanent establishment in France. So we want to avoid that, and that's why I gave you all of the different options, okay? And whether you are an employee of the branch or the sub or detached, you will always fall into one of those categories, especially the first 2 ones. The next slide, I wanted to tell you about opening a bank account in France. Obviously, if you are a US citizen, given the IRS has terrorized French banks or worldwide banks, it's complicated, but it's doable. Online banks are usually faster, way better, and you can see here the differences between online and physical banks. The one thing you need to understand, whether you're an ME or SIS, SRL, any corporate structure, a branch or sub, you have to have a separated, dedicated business account. The only time you don't need is if you are detached. So you are detached, you can have your foreign credit card, and you cannot use it in France. I mean, you cannot have a bank account in France because the detached has no legal status for the company in France. And the CNFE, because it's not known by bankers, sometimes it's complicated to open a dedicated bank account for CNFE. But that's fine because you can always use your personal account. In that case, this is one exception, where you can use a personal account to pay off all of the social charges and everything that you will have to face once you are living in France. Puma, I have a dedicated presentation for that. I just want to give you an idea about what Puma is. I'm sure a lot of you know, formerly known as CMU, which is the minimal health coverage for people living in France. Obviously, if you are legal in this country and you have been living in France for a minimum of 3 months, you can ask to be covered by Puma, so that, God forbids, you have to go to the hospital or anything, you are protected and you can be taken care of. Puma is not free. It's free for those that are, doing minimal amount of money. But if you are living in France and having income from outside of France, you will have to pay something. And how will they know? Based on your French tax return, because we've already assessed that the French tax return will capture and will declare your foreign income. Remember, declare your foreign income, not necessarily pay any taxes, because everybody knows that with most of those countries, UK, US, Canada, Australia, and so on, there is a double tax treaty. Wanted to share with you about us, who we are and what we do. We are, as you see, an international company serving mainly US, UK, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand clients. I hope my English is good enough for you. So you can see that my team here also, they all speak English. We help people settling in France. I won't have all the answers for you if you arrive in France, but for taxes, sometimes translation, and the guide to go to questions, people come to me for all of those aspects because I may have not all the answers, but I'll definitely tell you where to get the right answers. We even help sometimes people getting their social security number, even though it's not part of our job description, but we do understand that coming into a new country where French has a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of papers for nothing, and you got to be very patient, sometimes very frustrated to deal with the French administration. It's a good thing to have an ally that understands where you're coming from. And if you end up in trouble, you know that as an official elected, I'll try to save you, help you out if should you need be. Wanted to also let you know that before I open up to questions, if you want to receive a copy of this presentation, please like our pages on Facebook or LinkedIn. I will get a notification, or you can send me an email, and I will be very happy and thrilled to share with you this presentation. I've also added here all of the relevant sources, so you can see that I don't say only bullshit stories. You can see the foreign employer brand, CNFE, all of the good stuff we talked about here, and some of the agreements between countries like US, UK, and Canada. I didn't put the double tax treaties because everybody knows where to get that, or my space, well, was running out of space. So that's pretty much it. Before I open up to questions, I already had received 3 questions. I'm going to try to read them and see if we have already answered them. And if you have any questions thereafter, I will ask you to open up your microphone and call me asking all of your questions. So the first one is, I work for a large American-based company that has international business, but not in Europe. If I wanted to live in France for 1 or 2 years and continue to work with this American company, what is the best visa to do that? Well, I already answered. Unfortunately, I can't very much answer your immigration status, but there are what we call talent visa. There is a work visa that could be applicable. In terms of HR and legal, you need to ensure that you have the right status, not immigration, but now tax-wise, to operate in France. And I think we talked about, everybody knows by heart the different options, either a détaché, a branch, a sub, a CNFE, or a corporate structure, such as an SIRL, SIS, ME, and so on. Question number 2, I work in the UK as a cross-border worker, and I'm a director of my own company, which is a retail store based only in the UK. We have no online shops or telesales business. The only sales made are from those customers entering the shop. My question is, if I answer the odd email or phone call while in France, is that considered as a remote working? Well, you're asking a perfect question, because as I said earlier, one of the key terms you need to remember and make sure you are doing it the right way is permanent establishment. Permanent establishment, if you operate while residing in France, then your income you're picking up in the UK can be reclassified as French income. You're going to tell me it's a subjective term, that permanent establishment. Well, anything you're doing to operate a company, if you're answering on a regular basis, the phone, the email, and so on, as you would have done if you had been in the UK, then you are operating your business in France. But if you tell me, oh, I happen to be on vacances, on a gîte, on a holiday, and I answered my email, then you can do whatever you want. You will not be subject to French tax. But again, if you are, and everybody knows what it means to be operating your business in France. If you are, and you're making the right decision from France, again, those are indicators that you could be reclassified as a permanent establishment in France. Question number 3. My husband is employed for a California public school, and they are willing to keep him as a remote online teacher, but not willing to register their business in France or make him an independent contractor. Okay. Is it possible for him to register as an auto-entrepreneur? Yes. And declare the work through the tax system? Yes. One thing you need to keep in mind, that the ME, you're allowed to have an ME so long as you have a minimum of 2 clients. That it doesn't tell us how much. It could be 60,000 bill to one company and 10,000, remember the 70,000 threshold, and 10,000 to another company. That's fine. Okay. We would ask the employer to withhold the minimum US taxes and would pay social charges directly in France. Well, just let me rephrase. You will no longer be an employee of your employer, because that's it. You don't have an employment relationship with that California public school, but then you're billing them through the ME. The problem with public school or public institutions, that for sure they won't know about all of those things, and they might do not want to deal with you if you are an ME. ME means for them to be an independent contractor, but maybe what they mean is independent contractor while you are in the US to receive a 1099 and so on. Maybe they'll accept if you're billing them through a foreign company. So that's the possibility here. Then any questions? I'll be happy to take your questions at this point, should you have any.
Hey, Isaac, I have a question for you about the CNFEs. Is there a specific type of structure of business entity you need in the US to be applicable? Like, can that be from a single member LLC, or is it better from a taxed as an S Corp?
No, it could be any company from anywhere. The only thing you need to remember about the permanent establishment, if you are a single member LLC, that means you control your entity. And if you control your entity while residing in France, then French tax authorities might tell you, hell, the control you're doing, whether in the US or in France, is actually happening from France. So it's no longer a foreign entity. It's now a French entity. The CNFE, and yet I have people that are willing to take the risk. And I'm okay with it because they choose. My role is to advise them. Chances are very little, but you need to make sure of that element. So people, what they done is they changed their article of incorporation in the US or in the UK, put a friend of them, whoever family member, so that they create a virtual relationship to say that one in the US is controlling, and I'm kind of a non-détaché or détaché in France under the CNFE.
So that's the loophole, is like using someone else on the
correct
business.
Yeah. Because you need to show that you're not basically deciding for everything. What I want to do is, I saw there were a couple of questions, and unfortunately I didn't see that during the presentation. What about as a student? Is there an obligation to file French taxes as a student? Yes and no. You know that in France, that you are, if you are under an internship or a student, there are lots of money that you don't have to pay, not subject to tax. However, remember the obligation to file even if you made zero income. And I'll tell you why it's also good. Because as I said, France is a country with a lot of documents, sometimes documents that are just saying nothing. But having an avis d'imposition, which is a French tax return, even though it shows 0, will definitely help you to go to the bank, go here, go there. So it's better off to do it, even if it's a 0, or even if you have student income that is not taxable, at least you have a paper. I'm being asked if I can receive the slides via email. As I said, no problem. Just like the pages wherever you find us on Facebook or LinkedIn. Good option for people who are in France for being married to French citizens. I'm not sure how it will work if you didn't already have a visa enabling you to work in France. Yes, Alison is reminding everyone that the first step, and I think we talked about it in the presentation, you must ensure you are legally allowed to work in France. For the CNFE, could wages continue to be paid to my foreign bank account? Yes and no. Yes, technically, yes, you could be paid in the US, but remember, you will get a French pay stub, and that pay stub will be subject to social charges, to what we call the URSSAF, to DGFIP, to pension, to multiple parties, and they will all need to have a bank account in France to take direct debit the amount you owe. So it is better off to have the money lodged somewhere in France bank account. Even if you don't have a dedicated business account, it's okay to have a personal account. So at least you can take out the money from there, personal, and pay all the relevant third parties. The presentation is recorded. You can get everything, no problem. Regarding, so yes, you were saying about the CNFE. Yeah, CNFE also implies that you have a valid visa, correct? So if you are an American coming to France under the CNFE, you may have resolved the problem of fiscal issue, but you also need to be sure you have the right visa. Can you have a contract with a French employer and be a consultant to a US business? Yes. Make sure under your French contract, there is no clause that will not allow you to be an employee or dealing with any other parties. Sometimes employment contract limits you with any relationship with other companies or so on. I work for a company based in California on 1099 contractor. I'm moving to France in June. What changes will I need to do to keep working for them? Well, just tell them, do not issue a 1099 for me anymore. Issue me now, I will pay you, I will invoice you through my French company, whether you decide to have an SAS, SARL, or ME, you remain equivalent of independent contractor from outside of France. They will ask you to fill out the form W9, which everybody knows, but since the ME will be registered in France, they won't have any valid EIN, employer identification number, as everyone knows. There is a great link that Alison Grant-Lunas, she prepared a great book that I could definitely share with you as part of an email I will receive from you. The link, that book is excellent, that basically summarize a lot of the concepts of settling in France. Immigration-wise, I see you have a lot of questions immigration, but also general information to have. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Yeah, but Alison, if you have the link, you can maybe share it in the chat here. That would be perfect for everyone. Can you work remotely in France for up to 3 months without a visa? Unfortunately, not. The holiday visa and so on is not allowed, is a non-allowable visa. But again, my perspective here is more on the tax system. And as I said, whether you are legally, which is better, working in France or illegally work in France, make sure you are tax compliant, because we all know about the say about taxes and death. They will follow you and hunt you down forever. So make sure you are compliant with that. Should the CNFE be set up prior to moving in France, or can I do it after arrival? It's always better to do it prior, because then you can apply for your social security number. And by the way, getting a pay stub in France is the best and fastest way to get your social security number upon arrival. It takes about 2 weeks to get a CNFE, so long as all the paperwork are in order. And the costs are usually between 1,500 to 2,000 euros. As I said, it's one shot. Once you have the setup, then you don't have anything else to do, because no tax and accounting obligations. The only thing you have to do every month is paying 30 euros to do a pay stub, which we can do for you, or you can do it yourself online. But I highly advise you to ask us this question. Mitchell is asking us a question. I'm a legal French resident on the talent carte de séjour. I am a freelancer working for the television industry. What is the best way to freelance for an American company making a television show for US and in the US and getting paid in the US? Well, Mitchell, you can definitely keep or open up an US structure if your clients don't want to deal with a French company. And again, I said if, because it is preferred for you to open up a French company and bill them for the work you're doing, the great work you're doing for the US television shows. And I don't think there should be a problem, but sometimes US companies or US clients want to only deal with US clients or US companies. So in that case, you have to open up your US entity. And then if you are not alone, you can either put someone on the papers there so that you can be a CNFE in France, or you can keep your LLC in the US and create an ME in France. So instead, or company in France, and instead of billing directly your clients, as I said, the preferred way, you will bill your LLC in the US for the work you are doing in France. Do you mean create an ME? ME is a micro enterprise, but it's, as I said, one of the possibilities if you are below the thresholds, otherwise you have all the other corporate structure. In one of the slides, I was telling you I'm doing webinars usually once a month on different topics. We've done already on French taxation, US taxation. We did also micro enterprise Brexit, but I will probably repeat some of those and do on Puma or how to start a business in France, French tax preparation again. So any of those topics, if they interest you, make sure you follow up with us, or make sure you follow us online to ensure you have access to this information. When you build the US company as an ME, do they pay you to the US bank, or does it have to be a French bank? As I said, it is always better to have a French dedicated bank account. If for technical reasons you cannot open a French dedicated account, if they pay you in the US and then you bring back that money to France, then that's no problem. However, the IRS might catch you because they'll see a paper trail of financial flow going through your US bank account and might not understand what exactly is going on. They don't know that this money belongs to the French company. So it is highly advised to have a French dedicated bank account. If you can't, you can't. But there are, if you want to avoid gain and losses on foreign currencies, there are alternatives such as Transfer Bank, TransferWise, and so on. If I pay myself 100% in dividends from my SASU, will I earn trimester from French retirement? No, because to basically be part of the health system and be getting a pension, you need to contribute for it. So you need to pay social cotisation, social contribution. If you're not, what is the minimum salary to pay myself to earn trimester? As I said, is the SMIC. The SMIC is 1550 gross, 1250 approximately net, and 1700 plus cost for the employer. Is it worth to pay up more for a bigger pension? Well, you do the math, because the more you pay yourself, the more you face social charges and taxation. If you US LLC in the US and have a French business entity also, can you choose which entity to write off business expenses? Well, life is good according to you, Charlie. Well, again, the business expense has to be connected to the business you are dealing with. You can choose theoretically, because you are in a gray zone if both entities are doing the same thing. But again, if you are operating a US company while being in France, the IRS might challenge you in terms of an audit to show that you have so many foreign expenses. If it's occasional, then I'll probably tell you that's fine. And vice versa. If the French authorities see that you have too many US expenses, they'll tell you, you gotta be staying in France. It's kind of odd, especially now knowing that we have COVID and so on. So again, occasional fine, regular probably not. I don't see any question in the chat left. I think we are now expired the time we had allocated for this great presentation. Maybe any of you has something to add or any questions orally? No. Yes, last question from Serge. I have 2 US company. I have a dual French and US citizenship, but if I spend more than 6 months living in France and become a resident, should I create a CNFE? Why not? You could create a CNFE, as I said, so long as the US company is not, you're not controlling yourself. So you have somebody else with you, or you can create an ME because it's easy status, or you can create a normal company.
I'm
I'm sorry, Serge, have I answered your question?
I control the company, so I'm the sole owner, so CNFE wouldn't work for me.
Look, some people did it, but I don't recommend it because of the permanent establishment risk. If you put somebody else in the US, yes, you can do it. Otherwise, you should explore other alternatives.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
If there are no other questions, I don't see anything on the chat, nothing orally. Thank you very much for your time. I hope I was helpful. I hope you're now less confused dealing with French taxation and working remotely. I know it's not easy. You can contact us. You have our email address. Any questions, you email us. Otherwise, I will wait for your emails to share the presentation and the recordings. Thank you and have a lovely day.
Thank you.